I'm pretty confident that your cookbook is going to be amazing because, Austin. Um, but it's an effort to do them. So I'm going to tell you pretty much the whole story of how we pulled off this book. So just a little bit about me in 2020, I was the author of 4 cookbooks and contributed to many other cookbooks and lots of food magazines, especially Saveur magazine, which when it came out, I started writing for it and I wrote lots and lots of feature stories for them. And then also nature books like, as Angel mentioned, mycophilia and other topics. Um, so Louis Schwartzberg had read mycophilia, and he reached out to me, and we talked, over the course of 18 months or so that he was preparing the film, about mycology, just basic mycology, and I ended up with a little role in his movie Fantastic Fungi. Now, at first, Louis self-distributed the film. It's kind of like self-publishing a film. So he took it from one little theater to the next. This is before the pandemic, introducing the film, encouraging people to come, reaching out to all the local clubs to say, I have a film about mushrooms. And he really built the audience, the old-fashioned way. It's like hand selling books, it's old-fashioned way of building an audience. The side effect that was he actually built a community as well. He was gathering emails, he started to communicate with everybody, and he built a website and more. So in the summer of 2020, we're all pretty much in lockdown. Louis called me up and said, I want to do a Fantastic Fungi cookbook. So I really was pretty skeptical about that idea because, there's lots of great forager chef cookbooks out there. And, I just couldn't see how one by me would be, would be that special. But, at the same time, I was kind of thinking about it. How could I make what kind of cookbook a Fantastic Fungi cookbook could be? And that's when it hit me. Why not do a community cookbook? Now, I love community cookbooks because they're totally unpretentious. They're like deeply unpretentious and true to their place. They really reflect their community. The recipes tend to be simple and very well tested. If sometimes using ingredients that are maybe problematic or have to be replaced if you're doing them at home, nonetheless, it's a wonderful way of communicating recipes from a specific place. And I thought, while, this community cookbook idea really worked well for Fantastic Fungi because for multiple reasons. One is, Louis had built this community of people that he was connecting with himself and with each other in regards to the film. But also conceptually, it worked because for Louis, the thing that really got him so excited was the notion of mycorrhizal mycelium connecting trees in an ecosystem, right? And he took that on as a metaphor for collective action, how we all do better when we're connected and help each other. So, I pitched that idea and I said, how about we, build a website and, for people to dump recipes, mushroom recipes into. And then if we have enough great recipes, we can go to the publisher who had done the Fantastic Fungi, this book. I don't know if these things turn back. It looks like it's upside down. Anyway, it's like the Fantastic Fungi companion essay book. But anyway, those publishers, we could go to them and say, okay, we've got a bunch of recipes that are really good. Let's generate a book. So that's what we did. So those first discussions were in mid-July in 2020. And I noticed that, I was communicating with Louis over the email, and this other, party started to show up in the email CC bars. And they were magical threads. And I was, who the hell is magical threads? Well, it turns out they were a marketing company, and really the sweetest people, super easy to work with. And with them, I figured out, the format of this interactive recipe building website. So the things that we had to do, and I think the things that might be helpful to you all going forward with your cookbook is I had to develop recipe guidelines. So I would explain the importance of the guidelines, and then I would and then I put together different recipe formats so people could actually plug in their ingredients and plug in their instructions. There were some complications. I couldn't do just simple recipes alone, like just recipe, just ingredients, just instructions, because there's plenty of recipes that are composite, that like a quiche, you have a recipe for the crust and a recipe for the filling. So we had to kind of work out those sort of things. I wanted to have a list of the mushrooms so that people could check off, these are the mushrooms that are in my recipe. There's a lot of reasons why I wanted to do that, but one of the main reasons was to make sure that the author's idea of what mushroom they were using and the mushroom I thought they were using was the same thing. And this is a problem that I anticipated. I really anticipated, and I was worried about. And it's one of the reasons why I pushed hard to include the Latin binomials so that the recipe writers would be very clear. Yes, I'm not using, I'm not using a common name that maybe is not commonly used by other people outside my state or something. There was some resistance from the magical threads people about using Latin binomials, but then I, mentioned, well, it could really make a difference in terms of lawsuits down the road. And then they were like, right away, they got in line. So, I mean, that was something I'll never forget, just mention that it could be, there could be lawsuits as a result, and you'll get your way. I was worried about preparations of mushrooms that needed special care, like say Gyromitra esculenta, or mushrooms that were really easily misidentified. So we developed this little editor's note, which we put in the book and which I included in the website. And then, to deal with the problems of special care, like you all know that you have to cook morels thoroughly. But let's say one of your editors or someone in the club didn't know that, be really useful knowledge to have. Sorry about that. My husband will pick it up. Yeah. So anyway, sorry about that. So I actually made a contact with these two people, three people, David Campbell, and then the Mushroom Hunting Club folks. David is extremely knowledgeable. He's kind of west of the Rockies, and the mushroom hunting kids here are east of the Rockies. And so if somebody came up with something a little weird, I felt like I could call them and say, is there any special and are there any special preparations that I need to be aware of to make this safe to eat? But, it turned out to be a lot of worrying over nothing. The oddest stuff I ever got was recipe for psilocybes. So while we were kind of developing the website, I also started worrying about having enough mushrooms to test. I would have to test a lot of recipes to get enough for a book. So I started picking. Now, New York City is really provincial when it comes to wild mushroom retail. So I just went on this hunting rampage with these guys, Charles Luce from the New Jersey Club and Paul Sadowski from the New York Club. And we just picked all these varieties of mushrooms, which I froze, and I didn't really dry some of them I dried, like the trumpets and stuff. But anyway, I have this picture of them here because when they found this chicken, they had these little pen knives, and it probably took them 20 minutes to cut that chicken off. It was like they were dermatologists cutting a mole off somebody. It was just so beautiful to see how careful and respectful they were. That's another lesson that I've never forgotten. So we launched the website in late September 2020, and by mid-November, we actually didn't have many recipes at all. And I was kind of thinking this plan is a bust. So I started loading in my own recipes like these. And then the recipe of friends like Mike Woods. This is his black trumpet. It's his farfalle with black trumpet and gorgonzola cheese sauce. Delicious. It's like 50 shades of mustiness. Really good. And then these are other recipes, which you can see here what they are. And I started putting them in because I was trying to, fill out the website, make it at least look like there's something in there. I lurked on Instagram and Facebook for good mushroom cooks. I invited every club listed on the NAMA website at the time to tell their members if they wanted to participate, and some did. And then by early December, the recipes started coming in, about every other day. Like this one was early one. These are all really early recipes. Pappardelle with pumpkin and boletes, delicious. Pickled graylings, which are these little tiny relatives of chanterelle, beautiful little mushroom, which you can pickle whole. And so they're just delightful spread over on a dish. This is an enoki tofu soup that is got like 5 ingredients and is totally yummy. It takes no time to make. And then this dish, which I've made so many times, it's a porcini onion dip. So it's like, the way you start a regular onion dip with sauteed onions, you cook them way, way, way down to caramelize. Well, she puts in a porcini powder, and it's not caramelizing, it's going through the Maillard reaction, but it's cooking way down. I mean, it's, developing these flavors. And then she adds the sour cream and black pepper and other stuff. Delicious. We got lots of recipes using mushrooms in place of meat, in, typical or traditional recipes like, portobello burgers. And there was the one I published, this one had Havarti cheese in it, which was surprising how much the Havarti cheese really boosted the kind of umami flavor of the burger. It was a nice innovation that I found it was totally unexpected to me. That we had recipes like mushroom crab cakes, lots of recipes where the mushrooms augment a known dish like linguine with white clam sauce and hericium. One author was a master of this. She sent us recipes for things like lamb tangine with mushrooms, beef pie with mushrooms, chicken yassa, it's a dish from Senegal, with mushrooms, Hungarian stuffed peppers with mushroom. I mean, it went on and on and on. It was like a UN of recipes. We also received a lot of recipes using medicinal mushrooms like chaga chocolate chip cookies, or chaga chocolate cookies. There's no chips in that. And strawberries poached in birch polypore syrup, which was quite divine. And then we got a lot of drinks like shrubs and teas and infused vodkas. And this is a candy cap bourbon and milk punch, which that winter became my go to sleep drink. So there was a certain amount of repeat recipes. And I think that if you're getting a lot of recipes in, you can expect that to happen, like cream soups, onions, mushrooms, a roux, stock, cream. And I could tell by reading that some of the recipes would require like more development in terms of writing the recipe than I had the bandwidth to do time-wise, because, yeah, because recipes were coming in and I was testing every single one. And it's sad because, or I was testing every single one that looked like it was like I could do it, I could make the dish. I mean, that's definitely a problem. What made me sad at the time, because those are dishes that I think would probably be tasty if the recipe had accurately showed me how to make them. But if it was a really big, a hill to climb in order to figure out what the author maybe intended. I just couldn't go there. Some recipes were just simply problematic, like this one. This is like somebody sent a little easy recipe of black trumpets, fresh black trumpets, macerated in white wine. And I was like, maybe you could get food poisoning that way. So I called Britt Bunyard, and he was like, yeah, you can get food poisoning that way. It's okay in like a really, spirit like vodka, but wine, it's not necessarily got enough alcohol in it to suppress any potential spoilers. And, you're writing a cookbook. You can't have anything that's going to make people sick. And to that end, we also got some canned foods, like, pickles and fermented stuff. But since I couldn't be sure of their shelf stability, I couldn't be sure that they were safe because I couldn't test. I didn't have a kitchen lab where I could test to see that after I tested the recipe, were the contents of the jar at a pH, or did they have no spoilers in them? And were they at a pH that was going to be safe for shelves, for leaving on a shelf? So what we ended up doing was just turn the recipes those recipes we used, we just turned them into refrigerator pickles. I may be a little bit more careful than most people about using USDA regulation, or just using USDA data for my preserved foods. And that's especially difficult when it comes to wild mushrooms because there is none. But I'm what they call a master canner, which is really like, it's like getting your driver's license. It's not that hard, but still, I put a lot of energy into understanding the microbiology, and you just don't want somebody to get sick and then to have their lawyer call you up. So there were some college tries like this that were complete flops. So I'm not going to show you a recipe by someone else because that would just be trollish. But this is a recipe by me, and it was like, it sucked. But I thought it was a good idea. It was beans, maitake, and mussels. And actually, down the road, a recipe came along from Graham Steinrock that called for mussels and mushrooms, and it's fabulous. It's in the book. Okay. So some of the recipes really stretched my knowledge. I'm an Italian cook, so tempura was a challenge. Likewise, so was the delicate Dobin mushi. Finding those balance of flavors so it tasted like something was a challenge. Others kind of stretched my budget, like that's why, for example, this is a Takikomi Gohan, and when I first tested it, I used king trumpets, which are kind of similar in morphology. Rather than the matsutake, which is what it calls for, matsutake would have to get fresh, and that costs a bunch of money. And so doing testing with trumpets first was a good solution to determine whether the Gohan actually, had enough flavor or was something we wanted to publish. And then down the road, if it worked, which this one did, then I can, test it with the expensive stuff. And that's something that I would throw your way if you get recipes for, a very maybe a hard to get that, a recipe that you'd have to get the mushrooms from, I don't know, California or something at great cost to test them, that you might want to try testing them with something relatively similar in terms of morphology, just to see if the recipe works at all before you make that investment. So I noticed the recipes were coming from all over, lots in California, of course, and New York was, this sort of upper, eastern states. But wow, from all kinds of places, like Austin. We have recipes from Austin, which is pretty exciting to see and fun to talk with people, about their recipes down the road. Although sometimes there's a little problem with like, time changes and stuff. And then the tipping point happened. And suddenly I realized I have enough recipes. I've tested enough recipes to determine that that we're going to be able to do a book that's delicious. So we contacted the potential publisher. We said we can do it. They said great, and the deal came through. The publisher called for 100 recipes. That's pretty typical for a commercial book. That'll cost, that it'll charge, $32. There are plenty of recipes that are more. There are some that are less. But 100 is standard from my experience. So I tested about 250 different recipes to get there. So that's more than twice, 2 to 1 was my ratio. And that's not, it's not unusual for me, for my cookbooks. So this was my operating criteria for the collection. Did the cake rise? Did it taste good? And would the author agree with any changes that I felt needed to be made so that the recipe was either better or or clearer to the reader? Also, were they relatively original recipes? So the rule with recipe writing is this is generally acknowledged in cookbook publishing. The rule is you only have to change 3 ingredients to publish a recipe as your own. It sounds to me, I don't know, I think that's kind of shitty in a way. But when I was a less experienced recipe writer, I really thought everything had to be original. And so, tweaking 3 ingredients, okay, I did it, and others, I know others people do it because I've seen my recipes tweaked all over the internet. And so, you do it and you can claim some fame or whatever. But now I realize that giving credit for recipes I tweak doesn't make me look bad. It actually expands the community. So I would 100% recommend if you take a recipe and tweak it, just give us its provenance. It's more embracing. You don't have to be original all the time. And as far as cookbooks go, it's impossible anyway. Just about every flavor combination has been done by somebody. So then in some cases, the authors simply didn't follow the guidelines. For example, they would drop links in lieu of instructions. So obviously, I couldn't do anything with that because technically you can't put a link in a book, or at least, that's not functional. But also in terms of rights, we'd have to get the rights for the information that was portrayed, or we'd have to paraphrase it or whatever, anyway, it was just not going to work. Alternatively, there in some recipes, there was just too little information in the recipe. And I would just have to assume too much. I'd have to do so much guesswork that I couldn't be sure I was reflecting the author's original intent. So the kind of challenges I faced in testing, and I'm telling you this story because I'm guessing your testers will experience something similar. What is a handful of fresh trumpets? 1 bolete per person is how much bolete? Because if you look at these pictures, these boletes, oh wait, is this in front of you? You guys aren't seeing my bar across the top of the screen, are you? No, like my no? Okay, thanks. Because I can see it. It's like my menu bar. Anyway, so if you look at these boletes, some of these are tremendous. Some of them are quite small. So what's 1 bolete, right? It's not very helpful when it comes to a recipe. Typically in cookbooks, we use weights and measures rather than whole foods, which is what most people cook by. So as part of that website plan, I actually developed a list of weights and measures, and I really use them more myself, but I tried to encourage people to use them rather than whole foods, which is really how most people cook by. So that's what these kind of things are. And I would check with people, when I was testing the recipe to make sure that we were on the same page about this. But it's difficult to print whole food measures. And it's helpful to print weights and measures. Likewise, when you do instructions, it's really we always try to do two indicators, like time. Let's say you're sauteing something, time, how long it's cooking, and what you either smell or see. So cook, saute 10 minutes until the onions turn brown. That's the other kind of important coupling in recipe writing. So to test these recipes, the ones that came in from folks all over the country, I really had to use my own intuition to estimate like what an author wanted. Um, because here's the thing, I didn't want to call people and ask them questions before I had tested the recipe and tasted it. I didn't want to like kind of set up any false hopes that we were going to publish it or anything like that. I didn't want to waste their time or mine. So I would just kind of give it my best guess. And most of the time it wasn't impossible, like one leek wouldn't necessarily be a leek like this, not in a recipe, that has just 4 chicken thighs and a lot of mushrooms in it. There was also the problem of definitions, which you guys may encounter. Like, is it a quiche or is it a tart? This kind of stuff happens all the time, and so I would sort of find or create these little diagrams and send them to the authors and say, okay, which is it? And that usually, when they would come back and tell me, like I wouldn't put myself in the position of convincing them it's actually a quiche, not a tart. But if I gave them the information, then they would say what it was. It was almost always aligned with what I was thinking. So it was a kind of a good way to manage, I think, without hurting, pissing people off. I also didn't always have the pre-blended spices that authors called for. So I often made them like Old Bay or Cajun seasoning, which is actually pretty easy most of the time. I mean, you just go on the internet and you'll find recipes for Old Bay, and the chances are you've got just about everything already in your spice cabinet. And I really avoided buying blends because they're expensive and I might just use them for one recipe, and I didn't have endless amounts of money. And also I wouldn't have to make more than I needed. So I didn't have to constantly be storing all that stuff. And still, I have plenty of little jars in my closet, in my spice cabinets, that I have no idea what they are anymore. So I tested, pretty madly 2 to 3 recipes a day, sometimes multiple times. And as I went along, I took photos with my phone of the dishes, so I could see at which point they look best. So I would make up a little casual mise en place. I'd take a picture, then I'd do a picture of it kind of in preparation, and then a finished dish. We didn't publish this recipe, but in this case, I probably would have encouraged photographer to do the in preparation dish because it's the most vibrant in terms of colors and stuff like that. Though sometimes I would completely forget to photo anything until I'd already eaten most of the dish. In this case, it was like a really delicious hoot la coche crepe recipe. Really good. Ate it all, and then I was like, oh shit, I didn't photograph it. It's in the recipe, but it's in the cookbook, but there's no photograph. So usually for a photograph, usually for a cookbook, the publishers will give you like a 12-month period. And during those 12 months, you can figure out the recipe collection, make it nice and shapely. And then after the collection, after that 12 months, and you've delivered the collection to the editor and they go, okay, we like this, that's good. Then you do the photography, decide which of the recipes you want to photograph. Not in this case. What happened with this is the publishers, once we've made the deal for 100 recipes, not so long afterwards, they said, we want this book in 8 months. From the website launch to the delivery of 100 recipes and 90 photos. And that's really a scramble. So early on, I had to like fold in a photographer. And I knew from experience that people really eat with their eyes too. So I wanted excellent photography. And I reached out to this fellow named Evan Sung, who I knew from the New York Times, and I knew he knew cookbooks. This is just a one little page of his. He's done many cookbooks, just constant illustrations for newspapers and magazines. Now, how do you get somebody like Evan Sung? Food photographers are costly. It's like their fashion for, potatoes. But it was COVID and there was not a lot of work going on. And he had just been down to Chile where he met our friend Juliana Furci, and she had gotten him excited about mushrooms. And he had seen the Fantastic Fungi movie. So he was primed to take this gig at a price we could afford. Now, the challenge with a short schedule like that, 8-month schedule, was securing recipes that could be shot when the mushrooms it called for were in season, because the mushrooms are going to come in when they come in. So the way we planned it was to do three-day sessions in January, March, and May, which implies that we'd have to use West Coast mushrooms. We shot 10 recipes a day. Now, usually I know ahead of time what we're going to photograph. And of course, I knew in January what we were going to photograph in January, but I did not know in January what we were going to be photographing in March. But so in this case, we had to shoot what we had without really knowing what the book was going to look like as a collection, how it was going to all play out at the end. So, for example, in January, I was kind of, scraping the barrel a little bit to make sure I had recipes to photograph. I had to photograph 30 recipes. And so I just dumped in a bunch of my recipes because I had them. And I knew they were good and all that. So this was just stuffed eggs with black trumpets. I'm sure that there's people in your group who have made these. Luckily, down the road, somebody actually sent us in a stuffed egg with black trumpet recipe, but we'd already photographed it. So I sent her the photograph and I said, are you okay with us using this picture? She's like, absolutely. That's what they look like. And so that was a good solution. But definitely, it's much harder to do it the way we did it, where you just don't know what your collection is going to look like at the same time you're doing photography. So the administration was complicated, but this format is not a bad one for you guys to think about employing. As I was developing, testing, and deciding, okay, these are good mushroom recipes, I want to put them in the book. Then I would send everybody a release. I don't know if you'd need that for your community cookbook, but we did that. And I can send you a copy of our release so you can see what the format is. It's very simple. And so, after sending the release, some people were so excited to be participating. They loved it that they started sending lots of recipes. And those folks ended up being like the stars of the book, because they had lots of recipes in the book, because they're excited and they contributed plenty. So then the formatting, it was my job is writing, even though they had put it in the website, and then I took all that material off and I put it into publishing ready format, recipe format. And that was also using the weights and measures and using from my own notes the two indicators for instructions, both time and sight or smell. And then I had to call everybody. I sent them their recipes and said, here's the recipe. Let's go over it together. Because I always had questions like, did you mean this? Did you mean that? I had to cook it 10 minutes more. Do you know why? All that sort of stuff. Then I had to also find out, where did the recipe come from? Where did you get the idea from? Who are you? What's your favorite color? I mean, we just would talk. I talked and on average with all 50 authors at least an hour. And it was incredibly time consuming. And it was by far the most rewarding aspect of the whole book. I mean, it just made all of these friends. It's fantastic. And I remember, I look at their recipes and I remember them. It's a really kind of beautiful way to know somebody. So then after I got the okays from them, like, okay, we agree with, all right, sometimes I have to do some more tweaks to get their approval. Then I would go to Vanessa, the editor. She would edit. And then, but you can see that even before Vanessa had received recipes, we were moving forward with photography because we had to stay on that schedule and to take advantage of when we could get mushrooms. But one of the things that would often happen with these author queries is that, I would, I would ask them, they'd say, oh, actually I meant boneless chicken thighs in this recipe. They just said chicken thighs. And I had already shot it with the bone in, so I'd have to say, wow, can we like leave it with bone in and stuff from the, 99% of the time people were really just happy to make it work, for the overall project. A good thing to remember. Most people want to see a project succeed. So, um, yeah. So, the editor, Vanessa, and I sorted through these challenges of a rolling publication, and one was creating chapters. I mean, how do you create chapters when you don't know what recipes you have? Because recipes are coming in all the time. And since we didn't know what the diversity of foods was going to look like, we had to sort of be a little bit of creative in terms of our organization. At first, we were thinking small plates and large plates. Do we want to do it that way? But often small plates are people eat those as main dishes, so that didn't make sense. And then we thought, should we do first course, second course, desserts like Eurocentric style, but that didn't make sense because we were getting recipes from a multitude of ethnicities. So finally, we kind of resolved it after checking in with Master Jane Grigson, and this is what we came up with. And the beauty of this is that it allowed me to say, all right, I want to have these categories equally weighted with recipes. I don't want to have like 20 soups and pastas and 2 mushrooms with fish, right? So I knew where to pay more attention. If I saw a really good pasta recipe, I might replace an earlier one that wasn't quite as exciting or different. So that's kind of how it evolved. I also wrote essays. In general, adding recipes to cook, adding essays to cookbooks, it's kind of just value added stuff. It's like when you get an audiobook and they got some interviews and stuff in it, like at the end. And it's a nice thing to do, but I don't know that it's so necessary. I mean, maybe in your case, it would be nice for somebody to write a nice solid introduction to kind of characterize the club and its food perspective. So the photography was truly insane. We had those 3-day blitzes, 30 recipes, so 10 recipes a day. So there would be a 3 days, 30 recipes. I live in a loft in Soho, and it's in New York City, and it's pretty roomy and stuff. So it's good for doing a book. I've made all my books in this loft, but the prep in my kitchen, oh my God, it was just a fucking disaster. I mean, there was the storage. I mean, had so much food packed in my fridge, and the propping. I had to put all these little cards on everything to remind me, okay, when I use this pan for this dish, it takes potatoes, don't forget, and this one takes parsley, that kind of stuff. The cooking was this tremendous job, and then the cleanup. This was my dishwasher at the time, which is like one of those little mini things that you roll up to the sink and you plug in. So not only does it not actually wash that many dishes, but it uses the water that would be otherwise, useful to have in the sink. And it sounds like LaGuardia Airport, it just made this shit like this the whole time. So here's Evan taking pictures of the pickles. Oh, he was just so nice. He was so calm. It was really nice having a calm guy. So the first shoot was in New York City in January. Actually, January 6th was the riots were going on the TV while we were shooting. And And that time of year, there's not a lot of fresh mushrooms around in New York City. And we were really saved by Far West Fungi, which if you find yourselves in a spot, I highly recommend. They'll send you excellent product. They understand what it is you're trying to do if you're doing food photography with mushrooms. My two gals here, Nenny Panergia and Pam Krause, both food professionals. Pam Krause was the editor of Mycophilia and the editor of Well Preserved. And I've known her for a long time. She's really accomplished. And Nenny, I think between the two of them, these gals have like 100 years of experience cooking. And they were great. They just knocked shit out of that kitchen. They were wonderful. The food prepping, I mean, the propping came a lot of it from Global Table in New York City. And this is this friend of mine, Natalie Smith. She sold the store since, but she was fantastic because she had propped a lot of cookbooks. And she was able to tell me, these dishes look really good and when you shoot them and so on. There was a real challenge for me because all of my past cookbooks, I've used my own stuff, my own dishes, and I've styled them myself. I know what I like the food to look like, so it's simple for me. But this time was a little different because this is other people's food. And I wanted each dish to feel kind of individual, in sort of honor of all these individual authors, but also look delicious and, be kind of consistent from photo to photo so that the overall book had a sort of general feel, that was elegant enough to kind of lift the book out of a sort of I wanted to make sure that it didn't fall into sort of a down market category, which kind of can happen with community cookbooks. So I was trying to, bring it up market a little bit by making as elegant as we could. So food photography is really challenging. It's really a kind of pornography. And if you can imagine, like, pornography that's not sexy is utterly disgusting. So it's kind of the same thing with food photography. So risotto, for example, it's really, really hard to photograph. Some people, have achieved it, but I find it to be really hard. It always looks gross. Or creamy things. This is this fabulous dish of a cream of a ham and chanterelle, like a sauce, cream sauce with a poached egg on an English muffin. It's from Jack Zernecki. He is a famous mushroom person, 3 generations actually of it. His son now has the Joel Palmer House in the Willamette Valley. It's an all mushroom restaurant. Anyway, Jack Zernecki is an old guy now, but I wanted to include him in the book, and the recipe is delicious, but it looks like vomit. It's like not so. There's a problem with creamy things, and some things were just hard for us to cook or for me to cook. Like it took me 3 tries to make this fucking tortilla. I mean, it just kept falling apart. There are other problems like how do you prop a proper Japanese mushi tabletop? Without going broke buying Japanese, you know, ceramics. When we kind of fudged as much as we could, just did our best across the board. Um, you'll encounter if you do photography that there's a real challenge in shooting dishes where you can't actually see the mushrooms. For example, in this case, this is a kind of creamed egg where you have boiled eggs and they're sliced and they've got a bechamel with mushrooms, and then it's got a little breadcrumb and stuff like that. It's a kind of a Midwestern classic. It's quite delicious, but you can't really see the mushrooms. Here's a smoky black beans with huitlacoche soup. Absolutely divine. But huitlacoche, who can see it? I mean, I guess I could have put some pieces of huitlacoche around. In this case, these are Brussels sprouts. Here, this one was with hazelnuts and black truffle oil, and this is with Brussels sprouts with pea shoots and white truffle oil or something like that. I can't remember exactly. I mean, you can't really see the truffle oil. So those are problems. And, if you've got an option, if you can choose, I would say, pick recipes that will show the mushrooms well. But on the other hand, pick recipes that are delicious. That's ultimately your job, right? Um, so finding models in the COVID era, that was problematic. And mainly we just had the old hands of like 60 something white women. So we recruited my son, we recruited my son's friends, and we were able to, at least diversify a tiny bit. This, by the way, is a recipe of my dad's from my grandmother. It is a polenta on the board, with and I think it's on beechwood, which holds heat better. I don't remember. I wrote it in the head notes of the recibe, but it's a preferred, for polenta on the board, preferred wood. And then it's like a ragu with boletes here, or maybe I can't even really see, nor do I remember. In the original recipe, it also had little small game birds in it. But that was just pushing it too much, I thought. So during the shoots, the kitchen situation was, grueling, as I said. And as the day would progress, I'd start losing stuff like the peppermills. And then I'd spend all this time wandering around looking for the peppermill. Or I'd forget to put the potatoes on a dish because the little cards got separated and they were elsewhere or floating around or on the floor. So over time, I figured out that what I really needed to do was to have you know, sort of like what they do in movies, where they have shot lists, like we're gonna do this shot and that and then that. So I sort of did a shot list, but for cooking. And so I could figure out what dishes to do when, and how to best manage my stove. And that it took me a while to figure that out, but that worked really well. Now I didn't have to do that with my past cookbooks because I was never under this kind of pressure before. But if you're trying to, if you've got an expensive photographer and you only have 4 days and you're trying to do, like you might do 75 photographs, you're going to need to think about stuff like this to figure out how you're going to utilize the tools you have in the kitchen most efficiently. So Evan all along was printing out these nifty little Polaroids, which I thought were souvenirs, like to show my friends and my family. But on the second to the last day of shooting, a friend of mine from the New York club, who is a professional food stylist, she came by and she was going to help with a few problematic dishes that I just couldn't figure out how to handle, how to style. And and she was going to help with the cover. And she asked, okay, so where are the Polaroids? And I was like, the Polaroids. Well, it turns out, picture of them. It turns out that the point of the Polaroids is so you can see the props and the angles and it helps you create variety across the chapter. Now it was kind of late for us to do that, but yeah, that's why they exist. And so I promptly pinned them all up on the wall in the hall of my loft. And, it was actually it was really exciting to see them all. So I'm going to show you a little video of them.
Okay, here's a quick look at the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. Mushrooms with pasta, rice, and soup. Mushrooms on their own or with vegetables. There's lots of those. Mushrooms with eggs. Mushrooms with fish. Mushrooms with poultry. Mushrooms with meat. And mushroom desserts, drinks, and condiments.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great to see it all. Anyway, it might be useful to keep track of things if your photographer has that little printing gizmo, or if you have, even if you just take cell phone pictures, it would be probably smart. So when we're doing these photographs, I started out with pretty standard stuff. Process shots like this, that's where you get hands in. That's where you're going to need different models so that you have a nice diverse skin tones, male, female, whatever. So you do the process shots showing it being made. And then setups like this. This is a chicken with morels. And so this is actually a really cool dish. I taught it to Britt, but it's credited to Britt. But it's of French origin. So you brown the chicken, you add as many morels as you can spare, like dry, let's say dried morels you would put in the beginning, and then if they're fresh, you put them in a little later. Oh, when you brown the chicken, you add a bunch of shallots. You're browning shallots in there as well. You add as many morels as you have. Then you add a bottle of sherry and a stick of butter. You cover it and you just poach that chicken in there. And you can do a whole chicken too, which is quite glamorous. And it's divine. I garnish it with tarragon. Britt doesn't really like tarragon. He thinks it tastes soapy, but he sometimes puts parsley. And this is a crab and cordyceps soup, which is delicious. It's a bisque. It really has great flavor, super simple to make. In thinking about the propping of this, it makes sense to have saltines. So when you're putting together the setups, you might think about how someone would actually eat them. The piece of bread or the glass of wine, or I don't know, whatever. So we also do all kinds of little shots that would be useful to the art director. And I guarantee if you do photography for your cookbook, you'll be happy if you have some of this stuff. So it's like little shots that aren't associated with any particular recipe, although this is maybe the spice mix for one of the pickles. But by and large, just little solo portraits of a mushroom, or a little lemon wedge, that kind of thing. You'll find you'll have these little blank spots and that you can't do, like it looks silly to put a small photograph of a dish, right? A whole dish. So you need something small to put in there. So think about adding some of those to your schedule. They're easy enough to come up with. And then by the second shoot series, like the one in March, I started to kind of get a little more relaxed and loose with it. Because I really was looking for variety big time. It's not just me, it's all these other people. So I started to do these mise en place photographs. This is for a morels stuffed with pork, and it had, raisins, kind of a bruzzese style, delicious. And then I was looking at props differently. So this weird thing I found in my parents' basement, it's probably from the 70s. And I thought it looked really great with this mushroom strudel. It had a little horseradish sauce. And then we made a little green salad to throw some color. And then I started to really think about some of the props differently. And I also kind of let go of some of my control freak stuff because, the responsibility was on me. But Natalie at Global Table said, no, you need to take these dishes that they photograph really well. The photographers love them. And I was like, yeah, blue and green. It's not very mushroomy, but I brought it in. Evan loved it. And, we had a beautiful rice pilaf with shrimp and mushrooms from northern Greece. It has cinnamon in it. It's out of this world. And I thought, and Evan propped it with the everything kind of falling off the edge here. I thought he did a great job. And it was kind of an unusual picture for the book. And I also started to think a little differently about how to look at something, which happens. So in this case over here, this is a salad of white button mushrooms, Agaricus bisporus, blood orange, and fennel sliced real thin. It's a lovely salad. And, we had it in a bowl, and then I was like, oh, it's so boring. And so we just spread it out on the marble. And I think it looks great. In this, we also played around with some more graphic looks. In this case, this is Larry Evans, who some of you may know. He's a wonderful, he's in charge of the Montana Club, and he is a star of this film called Know Your Mushrooms, and he's a wonderful mushroom personality. and educator and all that. Anyway, so his dish was this brie cheese. I mean, it's kind of retro, but I don't care. It's fabulous. It's a brie cheese that was cut at the equator, like a bagel, right? And then he sauteed morel mushrooms with clove, which was really nice. And then he puts the morel mushrooms on the lower part of the cheese and puts the top of the brie cheese on, and then wraps the whole thing in puff pastry. Um, I use Pepperidge Farm puff pastry, which I think is delicious. And so, when it's all done, it looks great, and it's put in the oven for whatever, 15 minutes, and then you eat it as an appetizer. But we did this sort of graphic take on it, which I think is cool. And then this is a candied wood ear. We had some very odd desserts from a fellow in the UK. And it was just so sculptural that's the way we took the picture. I even tried some kind of risky stuff. Like this was a chanterelle infused vodka, which by the way was gross when it was room temp, but once it was really icy cold, delicious. I mean, I had quite a few. And I was like, oh, we'll put a cigarette in the background, which, I did two versions of it. And the publishers, when they saw the one with the cigarette, they were like, are you kidding? Um, my daughter, at one point, I was showing her the Polaroids, which I thought were just to show my family and friends. She said, these dishes look fabulous, but it's not the way people actually eat. Most of us eat in front of the TV. And I was like, right, we'll do one in front of the TV. So this is a dish from like a Missouri socialite. It's a toast with creamed. Sounds like I have a lot of creamed mushroom dishes in here. I don't, but these are just the ones that I picked for today. Anyway, with a creamed oysters on top, and it's just perfect little kind of small almost ladies' lunch type stuff. But we made it into a dinner, put a little martini in here, and then TV screen or a computer screen in the background with a movie. And I thought, wow, let's put Fantastic Fungi movie up. And then I thought, too pandering. So what that is, and what probably no one but you guys and other people have told the story to know, is that's the French Connection in the background. And then this was, I started playing around with organic backgrounds, which I think worked pretty well. Not all of them worked equally well, but this is just a bunch of loamy soil in a cookie sheet. And then on top of it was placed the dish with the recipe in it, which is a roast pork with apricot jam and chanterelles. Pretty good. But my pièce de resistance, I think, was Jane's Candy Cat Punch with some sleeping meds on it. And yeah, that didn't make it into the book either. But I thought it was really funny. I guess I was getting a little giddy toward the end of the photography sessions because it was so grueling. Um, and here, this shot is in the book. And what it is it's actually a quite delicious quiche by Gary Linkoff and Irene Lieberman. Gary, as you all know, is deceased. Irene and I are quite close, and she said this is one of our go-to dishes, and it's nice. She actually puts a lot of sour cream in it, so it ends up being a very rich quiche. It was delicious. So when we set this up, I had a box. I was helping Irene archive Gary's field notebooks. So Gary spent every day of his life when he wasn't on the road checking the flora and fungi in Central Park and also another park near him. He was between two. And he would record weather temperatures, how much rainfall there had been, everything, where all the little buds were at, insects he saw, where the mushrooms were at. It was just Thoreau-like journaling about what was happening on his walk in Central Park every day. They were beautiful, beautiful observations. And that's what these books are. These are two from Gary's collection, which again, if I haven't told you the story, nobody's going to know, but it's pretty special to me. Okay, so as the editing and copy editing came, after the editing, copy editing, that's when we would do the layout and the proofing. Um, I highly recommend that you all find somebody to edit your book, because it's just such a shame to put a lot of effort in a cookbook and then have like silly mistakes in it. Not only mistakes that are look kind of amateurish, but I have been in a situation where, you know how like when you type out a fourth, you might do 1/4. Well, that can very easily end up being just one, and the rest gone. So I've had a situation where instead of a quarter cup, when when the layout happens, if they don't transfer it to the proper quarter symbol, you might end up with just one. And so I've had like 1 cup salt, things like that. So you really want a copy editor who's going to come along and go, that doesn't sound right. Um, so the very last thing to be established is the title and cover. So titling and cover is really always, at least in my experience, a push-pull between editorial and marketing. We need each other. The editorial tries to protect the content's integrity, and the marketing folks, they try to get the content out into the world. So marketing in this case, they tended to want to call the book Fantastic Fungi, the community cookbook with a brand sign. And I was like, no way. I just felt like, yeah, well, so the publishers were coming from like a movie book space. That's what they do is they do books that are companion books to various movies. Like they do, I mean, they haven't necessarily done this, but they might do something like the Obi-Wan Kenobi Great Book of Chicken Recipes. That's the kind of thing they do. And I just persuaded them that if we wanted to have an upmarket book, and out of respect for the authors, we needed to stay away from too much of a fan book vibe. And so we ended up so we had a lot of discussions about that. And I also tend toward unusual covers. Many years ago, I tried to get my publishers of this book I wrote, my favorite cookbook I've ever written, called The Kitchen Ecosystem. It didn't do that well, which is too bad. I think it's a great book. You can probably get it for like $2.99 on eBay. But anyway, I wanted to publish corn cobs on the cover. I thought kitchen ecosystem, and then details, creating a continual kitchen or a sustainable kitchen. I was really excited about it, and they said no way. Anyway, I liked maybe something like this, which I thought would be kind of wonderful and exciting to look at. But the publishers said, no, we don't think so. But they did end up contacting this Instagram person and making a series of mushroom stationery postcards, things like that, greeting cards with them, which, so that's a happy ending. This is what we ended up settling on. This is the title, kind of a compromise. And this photo of Graham Steinruck's shiitake duck congee. I convinced our publicist to let all the authors speak for themselves. So that means if there was media that was interested, like in Portland, they could talk to me if they wanted, but we would send them the information for all of our Oregon contributors, so they could get the story from them. And at first the publicists were like, wow, do you think people are gonna, be cool with that, or professional enough or whatever? And I was like, absolutely. The quirkier and more individual people are, the better, because that's who we are. That's our mushroom community. So so there wasn't as much of that as I had wished, as I would have liked, but there was a fair amount of people outside, besides me, who were speaking for the book, who had recipes in it. And I just thought that was great. I got authors discounts for everybody. For an author, you get 50% off on your books. It's like a wholesale price. Everybody, all of our authors got that discount. And, they bought books and they gave them to their families and stuff. It was kind of Christmas time when it came out. So, that was, oh no, it wasn't. It was in the fall of the following year that it came out. So yeah, people would buy it for Christmas. And then we had a PR publishing party, which at this point everybody's pretty used to Zoom. So we had everybody load in onto this giant Zoom party. We had to like figure out a time when it could be cocktail hour for everyone. So for some people, it was like, for the like, English people, it was definitely a nightcap. For us, it was, dinner after dinner. And for LA, for the West Coast, it was kind of early 5 p.m. sort of thing. So, and we all got together and they got to meet the editor and they got to meet Louis and they got, everybody got to meet the sort of people Evan Sung was there, meet the people who put together the book in sort of by face. And then we broke out into these groups where different groups of, 10 people or so would be able to introduce themselves and say, well, this is my recipe and this was my experience. And they had a fabulous time. At the end, everybody got back on. I was a little sloshed. I was so excited. And everyone decided to go to the Telluride Mushroom Festival and reunite. And we did it to a degree, but not as much as I hoped, but Telluride is pretty far away for some people. So that's it. I have a few, so these are the takeaway tips, that might be helpful when you're making your book. Go ahead and take a picture of that if it's helpful, but this is just going back over the main things that we talked about. Test all the recipes. So that means start collecting the mushrooms now. Don't publish it if it tastes bad or doesn't work. So people will get pissed. And when I say people, I mean your readers will get pissed if you publish a recipe that tastes bad or doesn't work. And if you don't publish a recipe from somebody because it tastes bad or doesn't work, they will get pissed at you. So you just have to like cope with that and do what's best for your book. To the best of your ability, think about chapter organization. Try to do a shapely book in terms of a mix of recipes. Please get a copy editor. And yeah, I'm thinking for your cover, figure out who you are, because at the end of the day, there's a community cookbook is ultimately a portrait of community.
Mhm.
So feel free to contact me. I'm glad to answer questions. This is all my information. I write a Substack now, which is free and where I explore various ideas in greater depth that I mention and have a good trip, but it's really about food, mushrooms, microbes, drugs. So please jump on if you want. And my new book, Have a Good Trip, which is about psilocybe mushrooms and how they're used today, all of the self-organized groups that precede the science. So there's not, I mentioned the science, but it's really about what the community thinks and does. That comes out in October. But if you're at all interested, please pre-order. You've probably heard this from all of your author friends, but these days, the number of pre-orders determines how much PR money you get. So if I have 50 pre-orders, they're not going to pay for me to take a train to DC to be on NPR. If I have 5,000 pre-orders, they'll go, oh, okay, we'll help her get her book out there. So please consider pre-ordering if this is something you're interested in. So that's it. I'm going to end my show. And I'm going to move rid of my slideshow. Let's see. Okay. Do you still see my screen?
Yeah, I think you can. Let's see. Oh, there we are.
There we are. Okay.
Yay,
Hey,
that was
everybody.
so good. I'm so inspired. I'm
Yeah.
already thinking about just especially like the community outreach, because that's going to be a big part of it. And that flow of how you get information. So I know a couple of us in the group come from like information architecture, kind of user experience background. So thinking about how we weave in and get that information in a timely way. Such great advice that's going to be really, really helpful. So yeah, so I'm curious how many people are here tonight are interested in contributing recipes. You can raise your hand or feel free to unmute and we can start a conversation. Um, I know I've made a few recipes that I've brought out to like happy hours and things like that with different wild mushrooms. We don't have quite the biodiversity that, if we were pulling crowdsourcing from the entire
Oh, yeah.
world, we don't quite have that here in Texas. Um, but chicken of the woods is one that there's like quite an abundance. I think a lot of people have the opportunity to kind of forage those with all of our beautiful oak trees because they grow on our live oak trees. But I like to make a coconut chicken of the woods, so kind of doing a twist. But I'm curious too, like how many people are going to bring that kind of Southwest, and you had mentioned when you came here and tried all of our food, people are really
Oh,
into, I mean, all kinds of flavors, but and all types of cuisine. But I'm curious, um, what type of contributions people will make in the sort of Southwest category. It's going to be fun to see.
yeah, you
Um,
guys are a bunch of foodies. I mean, it's not gonna, you can't go wrong. You know,
mhm.
you're gonna have some great, great stuff. I would just recommend that you develop a style sheet because
Yes.
just for your writers, your recipe writers
Hmm.
of use, and so they don't have to answer questions that come to mind and then
Hmm.
potentially not be helpful. And for your editor's ease of use, so that when it comes to printing, you're not like having to,
Hmm.
somebody like everyone needs to use the same weights and measurements.
Famous.
And,
Yeah.
you just have to kind of be on the same page. And so style sheets are really,
Yeah.
really useful for that.
Yeah, I was thinking too, because one of the things you do in kind of user design is thinking about your persona, and one of the things that I think about a lot is with mycophobia, and I know like you delved into like this whole topic in the book that you wrote, and mycophilia, like what does that mean? Like I feel like in Texas there's still so much mycophobia and people just don't even know where to start. And over the last, I would say over the last like 5 or so years, I've seen this trend of like cookbooks that are trying to minimize, like the effort in a way, or like so many ingredients. So like thinking about those things, like, or who are the people we're trying to speak to? Are they people that are just coming into cooking with mushrooms, that may not have had, may not have even thought of adding that to their diet. So all the way to the like foodies, like how do we kind of have that spectrum, where we're thinking about everybody, like someone that's just getting into cooking, they might be buying meal kits or ordering meal kits and things like that, using just like a few ingredients. They don't have a pantry full of fancy condiments and ingredients and things like that.
Yeah, you definitely don't like ingredient lists do not equal flavor necessarily,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
long ingredient lists do not indicate like extra good flavor. Um, Sometimes the simplest things, if they're good, they're good. And it's also it gives readers a lot of confidence to, I
Mhm.
mean, always. Like there's this one dish that Kathy from your club, she gave us, which is Mom's red cooked chicken. It's fabulous.
Mm.
Got like no, it's got like 5 ingredients. And
Mm.
many times, I mean, I know numerous people, friends of mine upstate, all over, who have actually tried that recipe because it read so simply. So
Mhm.
looking through a cookbook, how often do you say, "Oh, I'm going to do the most complicated thing in this book"? No, no.
Yeah,
We all
yeah.
look at it and we say, "Okay, what is actually, look like
Mhm.
it's going to be the easiest to accomplish?" And it's also a way to test how good your recipe writing is, because
Mhm.
it's gotta, stuff slips through, mistakes get made. It's my, bane. I stay up nights worrying about things, like boo-boos and recipes, but
Mhm.
they have to, the job is that the recipe has to, it's like stereo instructions. It has to be exactly right, no room for fudging.
Mhm.
If they follow the recipe, it should taste the way you tell them it's going to taste,
Yeah.
so it's a really weird, it's a lot like, in its own weird way, it's like nature writing. You have to be both
Mhm.
evocative and very precise.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think would you all like to do I went ahead and picked a random number for the book giveaway, the Fantastic Fungi Cookbook, and Barb Danko, she's still here too. So Barb, I just need to get your address from you, and if you happen to be my neighbor, I might just come by and say hi. And drop.
Congratulations, Barb. If you want to send me an email, I'll send you a book plate. I send them to people who pre-order too in my other book. Hold on, I'll show
Oh,
you.
yay. I'll
Yeah,
send that to you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Here's
so
what they look like. So they're like these little book plates. And what
oh,
they do
cute.
is that they peel off so they're translucent. So you just see the drawing. And then I write your name or my name, or I write all around the edge. So I can send you one of these if you email
Oh,
your address. They're fun.
yes,
I've got a bunch of them. See, you can even pick the one you like. This one's kind of,
nice.
yeah.
You can respond to any of the automatic emails that go out. I'll get your info that way too, Barb. Um, so yeah, so I was curious, one question I had, and then we'll get to there's a lot of fun comments um in here, and we'll get to those in a second. But one question I had was, this this sort of edit, I guess like you said that three ingredients have to be changed for the recipe to be yours. And I'm curious, like, who who's the like oversight? Who's lawyered up? Like, who's like the,
Yeah.
because there's so many blogs and stuff online, like the recipe sphere is just so wide now. And I guess like how is there any regulatory group, or like how does that work, or who decided that?
It was common practice in publishing.
Okay.
What happens on the internet is the it's there's people who will contact a recipe developer like myself, and they'll say, is it okay if I use your recipe? I always say yes. But there's others who just copy the recipe and change the author's name.
Mhm.
I'm not going to
Mhm.
go after, I'm not
Yeah.
going to go after them. But I think it's sort of on, it's on them, it's on everyone to, um, it's just good practice to recognize who it's a kind of lineage thing, I guess. It's to recognize where you learned, where you
Mhm.
get your stuff from. And I think it adds gravitas to a recipe writer. I didn't always think that way. I used to be much more insecure, but doing it a long time, and I've learned it. I think it adds gravitas to a writer or a book to say where material comes from. And who taught me that was Jacques Pepin. He said it's only amateurs that think they have to be original all the time.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, okay. Thank God.
Wow.
Because it's a lot of pressure.
Hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to start with some of the questions earlier up, and anybody that wants to take their come off mute and just ask the question, just raise your hand and I'll we can do that too. But Chevy asked about what the texture of candy wood ears are.
So there's like a little spectrum.
Angel, did everybody freeze or am I just seeing frozen stuff?
I'm good on my end. That might be you.
um, shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Um, so there's a little bit of a spectrum. I've made them where they've been crispy, and sort of like shattering, like glass, but more often they have had almost like a, I they break, but they have been a little bit more gummy, not crispy, but they still have broken. However, over time, like any candied food, they attract moisture. So it's one of those things that you make and it's like, we're putting them on a cake now, sort of thing. It's hard to keep in I mean, I suppose you can put them in one of those jars with those little sachets that have
Mm.
that take the moisture out to hold them, but yeah, they were on a spectrum from crisp to plasticky. Not, I don't mean that in a bad sense, but I mean in terms of their sort of density,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yes.
very hard rubber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Gwen, you had asked, are we working on another book? I know we had talked about like making like a zine, something that may have recipes in it but have other things. And that's even something like once we put together this circle or committee, we can decide like, do we want it to be all recipes? Do we want it to be, I definitely know food has to be part of it though. That's and recipes has to be a part
Always
of it.
has to be part.
But maybe we've talked about the zine idea because that's been going around for like a couple years. A lot of people like the idea of making, and Austin's such a zine town.
Well, that's
Um,
maybe a very good way to warm up, if like you did a
mhm,
zine of appetizers,
mhm,
and see if you can generate some interest, uh,
mhm,
kind of get your ideas out there, and also kind of develop what your formats are going to look like, your styles, things like that. It seems like a zine is a great opportunity. It's sort of like a Substack, to test the waters,
mhm, mhm.
ideas, and a little sort of marketing to get I mean, you don't
Yeah,
have to do a cookbook, but it's nice having everything in the same place.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I also, when Jeannie was talking here in Austin a couple of months ago, and I bought the cookbook, then I knew she mentioned she was working on another book. So that was also for
Oh,
her.
okay.
I'm glad at the end that she showed the other book that she's working on. So yes, and I
Yeah.
remember the
Yeah.
pre-order comment.
I'd
So
love to come back and speak with you about that book sometime if you want to talk about
Yeah.
mushrooms and there's a lot of different aspects of it that I write about. I just finished writing a Substack. I think I'm going to do a talk at the Telluride Mushroom Festival on aging and psychedelics,
Mm,
uh, which is something that kept coming up throughout writing the process of writing the book. And, so now I'm
mhm.
thinking about it, and
Yeah.
sharing what I learned personally and, you know, anecdotally from the community at
Mhm.
large.
So I promise I'll be quiet after this, but I also wanted to say I went to the Good Medicine Confluence in Durango last week. So it was a herbalism conference, but then there was also a bunch of stuff about mushrooms. And I was hoping that I would run into more mushroom people. There were actually, I saw somebody with a Central Texas Mycology sticker on their stuff. So
Oh,
yeah, there was a bunch of Austin people there, but I hope that there'll be more cross-pollination between those disciplines.
There is something coming up. This is Gwen speaking. Yeah.
mhm.
Okay. I'm going to try to put a picture in the chat. If I can find this. There is something called mycelial mysteries or mycelium mysteries. It's part of the, shoot, let me see if I can find it on where would it be? They are, here it is. I'm going to put it in the chat. Let me open up the chat here. Chat. And what they're doing is they're part of a very big, oh dear, I don't know if that's going to be okay. It says unknown PDF. Can somebody open it and see if they can see it?
I actually am unable to see, I don't see it going into the chat.
Sorry, there it is.
I can send it out to everyone afterward.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was going to say. I don't see it in the chat, and
Oh,
rather
I
than
see it
kill
now.
time, send it to Angel maybe. Oh, there it is. Yep.
Oh, there, it
If
just
you
took a
can
second.
see, I don't know why it says unknown PDF, maybe, but I believe that is mycelium mysteries, and it's part of the Midwest Women's Herbal Conference. It's actually quite a big shebang. And a lot of people go. I'm going to be there this year, talking about psychedelics. It's I was there years ago. And yeah, it's pretty, I mean, these people really are accomplished herbalists. So you
Mm.
might have fun if you can pull it together to get to where the hell is it? It's like Wisconsin somewhere.
Yeah.
Cool.
Someone did ask how to pre-order your book. Is that through your do you have a
Yeah.
link to your website?
Well, anywhere. You can pre-order on Amazon. You can pre-order on thrift books. You can pre-order Barnes and
Okay.
Nobles. You can go to your local bookstore and say, get this book for me. If you order on Amazon, of course, we're all like sort of under the thumb of Amazon, but what'll happen is that they charge you the lowest price. Even if the books, what they do is there's like the main price, and then they'll drop it at different times. And if you buy Amazon, if you pre-order a book at Amazon, you end up getting the lowest price that they're going to offer up until that date. So, if money is an issue, that's probably a good idea. Otherwise, go to your local bookstore and say, put this book on the shelf for me. I want to buy it. And then they will. And then the beauty of doing it with a local bookstore is that you're supporting a local bookstore, but also they'll usually buy two. They'll buy yours to sell to you, and then they'll buy another one in case someone else thinks the same way you do.
Mhm.
So
That
that's
book
really
is
helpful.
awesome.
And it can make a huge difference. And the reason why pre-orders, I think, have happened like the way they have. I mean, everybody's talking about it. All writers of quality that I know are dealing with this bullshit, because if you don't have a giant social media following, which I don't, I mean, the publishers sort of don't know what to do with you anymore.
Mhm.
Because they base all of their budgets on pre-sales, which are based on large social media followings, because they're publishing so many books from people who have Instagram accounts or whatever. And often those books there's just one that's produced. It's not like someone like me who has a lifetime of books. But the publishers don't care. They just want to, they're trying to keep the lights on. So
Mhm.
if you pre-order any book, it helps the author. It helps the author get attention from the publisher. It's weird, but that's the reality.
Yeah. Um, so Chevy asked, when you're doing the testing, the test kitchen, do you have any kind of like rating system? Because I know you talked about like certain variables, like does it taste good, the complexity? Like, did you keep like kind of a card or some sort of like
Oh yeah, I have copious notebooks. So I would print out the recipe,
Mhm.
and then I would take notes about the recipe, sometimes on the page, but usually in a notebook. I'd paste the recipe in the notebook, and then I do all my notes. And what I do with those notes is that I write down everything that happens from the first, pulling the first thing of mushrooms out of the fridge until we plate it. Everything,
Mm.
how long everything tastes. I smell it, I taste it, I do a visual cue. I time everything. I use stopwatch. I do their times, but then I check, and if it's not cooked enough, or I check earlier, and if it's already cooked, I make that notation.
Wow.
I mean, everything. It's just being incredibly precise. It's like
Mhm.
it can't. This is the trick. I mean, I've taught so many cooking classes, and I always tell folks that the trick is to pay attention.
Mhm.
The way you fuck up food is like, wandering off to check your email, or going, getting distracted by something. You have to pay attention, and you have to taste all along the way. Does it taste good? Does it taste right? Are things going in the right direction? And
Mhm.
so that's what I do. That's how I stay on top of a recipe. It's a job. It's time consuming. But if
Mhm.
if you're only responsible for, doing a couple of recipes a week, it's actually a joy. It's
Mhm.
interesting, it's fun, it's building something that's kind of more permanent. because you know the recipe works. It's a drag if you have to test it multiple times, but it's a bigger drag if you have to test it multiple times because you fucked up and didn't pay attention.
Mhm.
Also happens.
Yeah. I'm curious because I've done like candied wood ears before. Trying to like add like local flavors to like using prickly pear juice or like, instead of like a cranberry or something. I'm curious what the European, because I haven't had a chance to go through the whole recipe book yet. Um, what did he infuse the wood ears with?
I don't remember. I don't remember, but I remember that birch polypore syrup. I was like, I gotta
Mhm.
get some damn birch polypore. It's not the easiest thing, but then it turned out to be really fun. And you could take that so far, there's all kinds of infused syrups you could do to poach fruits in. You know,
Yeah.
uh you'll have to look at the book yourself, or I can look it up right now, but
Mhm.
I don't remember. I mean, it's been a while.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he was very inventive, and a very precise recipe writer. He was clearly a pro who had
Hmm.
no outlet for this weird stuff he was into. So
That's
we,
great.
yeah, so he was fantastic. He was a really nice person to do business with and get to know a little
Mhm.
bit. Yeah.
I really liked your the shots of chanterelle. So I've been doing that the last when we have a nice season. I will keep the stock and take shots of it. And I've never tried it
Yeah.
cold though. Like I almost just like keep it as like soup stock or whatever, put in whatever
Yeah.
rice or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, no, that was
But
vodka.
it's
That
so,
was
but
vodka.
not the vodka, which
Yeah.
is
But stocks and soups and things like that. I mean, there's no reason not to include stuff like that. I mean, all those
Mhm.
byproducts, how beautiful to do a recipe, a chanterelle recipe with the byproduct being a stock that is then another recipe. That's what my book, The Kitchen Ecosystem, is about, is these linked recipes.
Mhm.
And, it's just beautiful to do that with mushrooms.
Mhm. Or like
Um,
have those little like notes in there, like, save your ends for
yeah.
making veg or a mushroom stock later.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing I find is that because that's what I went through with the kitchen ecosystem is one of the things that's always driven me crazy is when people say, save the stems to make stock. And I'm like, well, where's the stock recipe? You know, come on. So
Yeah,
give it all to
like
me.
put that out there.
Yeah. So that's my little bugaboo. If you're somebody that's going to ask, if you're going to make a suggestion, tell them how to do it.
Hmm.
It's not that
I
hard.
like
So.
that advice. Um, so kind of going back to the psychedelics, so Jax made a comment about what he would love to see a psychedelic mushroom candy recipe. And
Listen, there is
hearing you talk
one.
about the
Can you,
oh,
is this
there's one.
upside, is this backwards when I put it up to you,
No,
right?
we can see
No, it's
it.
not. Okay, because it's backwards when I look at it. There are many. I think the best thing about this cookbook is that it's mostly candies at the back. So
Mm.
highly recommend who wanted it. Let me Jack,
Jax.
check this book out. It's like I had to review this book, and the problem with it is I could only test one recipe at a time because I'd make it and I'd eat it, and then I'd be tripping. So yeah, so it's a one recipe at a time kind of cookbook, but it has good stuff, candies in it for psilocybin,
Mm.
if that's your thing. I think they're the ones.
And with I'm curious too, like, is there any, and I'm sure you've read about like the chocolate bars that were tainted with like the
Muscimol.
yeah, with muscimol or like
Yeah,
who even knows what it was? Like I'm hearing like
it was the
synthetic,
FDA said muscimol.
was it?
Yeah,
Um,
which is a very common thing, by the way, Angie.
mhm,
Because you can buy muscimol extract from people like our friend Brandon Pitcher. It's totally legal, and
mhm,
put it in products. Well, what's like fucked up? I wrote a little Instagram post about this. What's wrong about it is that they are marketing as if it's psilocybin mushrooms, you know,
yes.
and the
Yeah.
AMA people, the whole Amanita muscaria crowd are all up, they've been uptight for quite a while, thinking that it would end up, it's going to end up causing a prohibition of Amanita
Yeah.
muscaria if it's associated with this false
Like
mark.
yeah.
And there's already been calls from the scientific community saying that this has to stop.
So was it an overdose? Because I know you can get, it's in a disassociative. So was it like, the
no,
kids that were going to the hospital, was it just like too much? They ate too much of the chocolate or something?
I don't know. I don't know. It's muscimol. It's a little bit of a, I mean, look, some people like to trip on it. I think it can be a little gross, but
Yeah.
but people should know what they're taking. And, muscimol, it's a
Mhm.
psychoactive, but it's not, it's not shrooms, you know,
Yeah.
it's just kind of bullshitty. And I hate that. The same thing happened
Mhm.
with truffle oil, by the way, it's not this sort of false marketing thing is nothing new.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, with that psychedelic book, do you know like if there's any extra like regulatory processes s- since the recipes have, something that's federally still considered illegal? Like there's nothing illegal about writing a recipe book with like psychedelic mushrooms.
So that is a whole other, I'm writing a talk about this right now. There's a whole other category of, there's a lot of challenges to people who want to write about illegal drugs
Mm,
and which psilocybin is. So to figure out how to do that in a way that is, that's not going to lead to you getting sued or arrested, um,
mm,
and still provide information about these drugs, which people are thinking are legal, or are curious
mhm,
about, especially the large number of folks who are suffering from complaints like depression and OCD. They're looking for a new drug and they think it might be helpful. Well, how does a writer share that information without jeopardizing their freedom?
mhm,
um, is a really tricky thing. So I'm actually doing a talk. I just made the deal, no, the deal. I agreed to do a talk on that very subject at the Telluride Mushroom Festival.
mhm,
How do writers, because the way I avoid traps, those kind of traps, um,
mhm,
legal traps and ethical traps and
mhm.
traps of advocacy, inadvertent advocacy, things like that, are the same techniques that
Mhm,
I think people could use to evaluate retreats, neo shamans, and
mhm,
psychedelic products.
mhm. Yeah. Um, so yeah, we have a lot of tasters, people that want to come taste at the taste kitchen. I just imagine how fun it would be to like turn this into like, a bi-monthly social event where we can taste out, make a few recipes, test them out, take notes. Um, yeah, and Eden, I like your comment too about tying it into our block program. Um, I imagine there being like a lot of lion's mane and recipes based on the mushrooms that people are growing from the recycle program. We did do a class during the pandemic with one of the chefs here in town, and he did a lion's mane barilla tacos, which was really fun. That was a really fun class.
Excellent. You can reach out to some of these restaurateurs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to test their stuff because they're going to give you a recipe. I mean, I know I've done lots of rewriting of restaurateurs, chefs' recipes. It's going to be like, yeah, I have a taco recipe and it's for 400. So, it'll take a little
Get out
work.
the calculator.
Yeah. But, and no, a calculator actually doesn't always work too, because, you
Gotta
can
weigh things
reduce.
out and
Yeah. Well, if you might reduce the amount of, garlic, but when a smaller scale, it turned out to be too much garlic. So
mm,
really, I've always had to, when I do a chef's thing and they give me the big size, I always have to like diminish, then test, and then rewrite.
Good to
But
know.
often chefs' cookbooks, they don't do that. They just do the math, right? They just diminish the ratio, they
Mhm.
diminish the ratios. And then you eat it and it's like, oh my God, there's so much pepper or it's so much garlic or, because things don't translate just by numbers.
Mhm.
Everything has every food flavor has its own characteristics.
Yeah. What was there a set of like I guess in the style guide or at least like the parameters with the Fantastic Fungi Cookbook where recipes were made for a certain amount of people? Or was
Yeah,
every
good
recipe
question.
different?
Good question. I didn't think about putting that in this presentation. So people do it for, depending on the concept for the book, like if you're going to do a book on, like if I was going to do a Burning Man cookbook, I would do it for the size of my camp, it'd be 80 people.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but most of the time it's four.
Four.
Because
Okay.
four can be easily, split to two or
Mhm.
increase to six or eight, like the usual sort of increase sizes. So four is a good place to head, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, when you do your style sheet, say, do serving sizes of four. I can
Mhm.
send you the style sheet. I mean, it might take me a few days to find it, but I can send it to you and so you can adapt it.
That'd be great. Great. Yeah. I'd love to have that.
Why not?
Yeah, and your
Glad to
spreadsheet
do it.
too of kind of like, doing the release to, how you collected all the data.
Yeah.
Love to
Yeah.
have that
Because,
workflow.
you may need to do, you may need to keep track of releases,
Mhm.
that they agree to have their recipe published and not like then come after you for money or,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't, usually that stuff doesn't happen, but it's
You just
easy to
never
do it the
know.
right way,
Yeah.
and it's like we all understand,
Yeah. Well, this has been so great. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And I'll definitely keep you posted. But I think it'll be a slow process. I can see us doing like coming out with a zine to start, like something small, and then working up to something
Yeah,
like as we collect more recipes. Uh,
great.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's fun to do. There's really it's a special kind of way to make books and to define community. I
love
mean, I
it.
love it. I love it. So I'm so glad you're doing it. Your food scene is
Yay.
great. I'm sure it's going to be a humongous success. I'm near and far.
Oh, appreciate it. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and Barb will get the book out to you. And yeah, everybody have a great rest of the July, and maybe we'll see some of y'all at Telluride too.
Yeah, I'll be at Telluride, so come say hi.
All right.
Thanks so
Good
much.
night, everybody.
Good night.